Welcome to the second semi-final of the Baldo Invitational Tournament for Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. In the blue, we've got Zach Frennett playing as the Vikings, whilst in the orange, we have Groundskeeper Willie playing as the Berbers. This is the third game in a 5-game series, and it is match point for Zach Frennett, who has won the 2 preceding games, the first of which you may have seen in our stream earlier this afternoon. Another thing that we can take a look at straight away is that this is Budapest that we'll be playing on. So for a potentially pivotal match, I should say, we have a very interesting map which will certainly affect how both players will start this game. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, Budapest is an unusual starting setup in that each player begins with double the normal starting parameters. So we can see each player starts with 2 town centers, double the amount of starting villagers, and 2 scouts, and of course double the usual starting resources as well. So there'll be plenty for these players to do in the offset. So without further ado, let's unpause the match and see if Groundskeeper Willie can prevent what appears to be an unstoppable assault upon the final spot by Mr. Zach Frennett, who is keen to get to the final to face the thus far undefeated Grimm. Up go the houses. Zach Frennett begins with a little bit of scouting in the north and in the east. Groundskeeper Willie claims some early goose for a festive start to the match. Goose are being eaten both north and south. East and west. We can of course hear the snurfling of delicious boar, which will soon join the banquet being enjoyed by both players under their town centers. We can see that each player can enjoy 4 boar, 2 in the north, 2 in the south. We'll have to see who will go to eat their boar first. As you know, I am quite a fan of a well-maneuvered boar lure. I think it is quite an aesthetically pleasing sight. Now we can see here that Groundskeeper Willie has scouted Zach Frennett's southern base. We'll see if that bears any fruit for him in terms of early aggression later on. Let's take a look, in fact, while we're waiting for those exciting boar lures, because there's still plenty of geese to be eaten. Let's take a look and see how both players' scouting compares. So it looks like Zach Frennett has a fairly decent amount of the map scouted, but he has not yet encountered Groundskeeper Willie, although I dare say this scout in the north could run into his northern base in short order, although he seems to have been diverted. We'll take a quick look at Groundskeeper Willie's minimap, looking there in the bottom right there at the minimap. And as I mentioned, he does know that Zach Frennett has his southern base over here. He can probably postulate based on the relative distance between his own 2 bases where Zach Frennett's northern base is, and indeed, if we go to the main view, we can see that they are phenomenally close on both frontiers. Zach Frennett's scout had indeed noticed Groundskeeper Willie's northern area. Am I hearing a boar lure? Yes, I was. Zach Frennet has successfully lured his first boar, and it went under the town centre. I'm not seeing any dead villagers, so we can only assume that it was a very successful one. And indeed, his second villager there, grabbing the next boar, almost perfect. We would have liked to see those last few delicious chunks of boar being enjoyed before moving on to the next one. A little bit of a scuffle between the southern scouts here, but nothing too exciting. We do have a successful boar lure from groundskeeper Willie in the south as well. Now, Zach Frennet has brought in his other scout in order to try to snipe groundskeeper Willie's scout to the south. However, in comes some loom-enhanced villagers. Repeat, they have loomed clothes, and they will make it an even one-for-one trade scout for scout. And they'll also do a little bit of house walling in this gap here as well. And indeed, Zach Frennet has reciprocated on the other side. A fairly innocuously positioned barracks from groundskeeper Willie's perspective, although because of the nature of the map in Budapest, we do know that this barracks is exceedingly close to Zach Frenet's southern town centre, so that could pose considerable problems for him when we get into the feudal age later on, especially if this area is not walled up. Taking a look at the north here, we can also see that groundskeeper Willie has been busy building some palisade walls. Repeat, palisade walls. We'll see if those do him any good. I think he could have afforded to have been a little bit more aggressive in his palisading, but his scouting hasn't revealed what's to the extreme north of those walls, so that's probably the main reason for the conservative placement of those walls. He could probably have afforded, were I him, to replace this wall here in the west with a wall that simply goes to the water here in the north, and that way he'd secure this stone and gold and relic. But that said, it looks like he might have bigger problems, because Zach Frennet has come in with a little bit of a sneaky villager there, it looks like, and a denied barracks, I dare say. Now, where are these villagers going, one wonders? And groundskeeper Willie is the first to the feudal age by a considerable margin. Zach Frennet is only at 35%. But, crucially, he is building some fishing ships in the north. Now, groundskeeper Willie does have a dock, and he does have one fishing ship as well. But, if we switch over to the economic stats here, we can see that Zach Frennet does have a considerable population advantage over groundskeeper Willie. So it's 43 villagers to 34. So that is certainly worth staying in the Dark Age for a little bit longer, one must imagine. Now, if you are a seasoned watcher of Age of Empires, but you're unfamiliar with the Budapest map, you may be wondering why these villager populations in the Dark Age are so especially high from both players. And the simple reason for that is that each player has two town centers, and is trying to follow the usual rule of keeping their town centers producing villagers on a constant basis. Obviously, if you have double the production, you are going to have a considerably larger amount of villagers going into the feudal age. So we can see here that Groundskeeper Willie has built a fairly forward tower, which is threatening Zach Frenet's house here. In a few hundred years, that house might have to replace a window or two. We have another scout running into a little bit of trouble here by Zach Frenet, who is forced to retreat from these two loom-enhanced villagers, against whom the scout is, of course, no match. He has absconded with a couple of geese here, though, which the villagers did not return with, but it looks like this scout might retrieve them. Or is he perhaps going for the murder? No, he seems to have ridden right by. He is not hungry for geese, and he's also not hungry for man flesh. Repeat, man flesh. Now that's interesting. We've got some delicious shore fishing going on here by the villagers. Now that's a rare sight, isn't it? Handsome. You have to love those nets. Making short work of that delicious shore fish. Some of them switching over then to the local ibex population to enjoy some delicious ibex meat as well. Now the population overall is tightening up, it has to be said. It's tightening up. It's 59 to 53 overall population. Although Groundskeeper Willie does have a certain military population advantage. It's 4 to 2. Repeat, 4 to 2. And that will be the additional scouts that Groundskeeper Willie has produced, and he's getting bloodlines for them as well, so it would appear that something of a scout rush is his desire, although, to be frank, were that my intention, I probably would have tried to scout out the north a little bit better, because if he had done so, he wouldn't need to waste time trying to break through this palisade wall here. He would realize that he could instead simply ride straight into Zach Frenet's undefended northern wood line up here. Zach Frenet going for a fast castle, which could certainly scupper the opportunity for any scout raids to succeed. You can see that being alerted to the production of enemy scouts, Zach Frenet has also begun making some spearmen here in the south, possibly wary of a similar raid to the south. Quite a lot of villagers on gold here by Zach Frenet, and indeed he's starting to queue up some knights in his stables. So he'll put that gold to good use. Let's take a look at his resources versus Groundskeeper Willie's up there along the top left of the screen. So a fair amount of gold, it has to be said, and a sizable food income as well from all of those fishing ships in the north, in case you're wondering why you're not seeing any farms here in Zach Frenet's base. This is the reason. There's an enormous amount of food being generated from these fishing ships, and there's more in this lake as well. Zach Frenet also expanding to the south with another town centre and another dock on another lake full of delicious salmon. That town centre also technically puts him behind Groundskeeper Willie's walls, which is also certainly a matter of concern for Groundskeeper Willie in the long term. So Groundskeeper Willie is now in the castle age as well. We are looking at a fairly significant population discrepancy now, unfortunately. Zach Frennet approaching 80 population, Groundskeeper Willie approaching 60. So more than 20 populations worth of a difference there. Groundskeeper Willie is queuing up some camels, which is a smart move, considering that we know, and indeed he now knows, that Zach Frennet has knights. Unfortunately, he has only queued up the one camel, and I dare say he will need a few more than that if he's to overcome Zach Frenet's ability to produce knights, which with this amount of food and gold in the bank will be significant. Repeat, significant. At the moment, Zach Frennet is content just to do a little bit of raiding. Groundskeeper Willie trying for a quick wall there, but he didn't quite get there, alas, which means these knights will certainly indulge in some rape and pillage of Groundskeeper Willie's southern populace. Now, you may be wondering why these arrows are seemingly plinking off these knights with relative lack of effect, and that is because the knights here have some significant armor upgrades, whereas the town center does not have much in the way of ranged attack upgrades just yet at the blacksmith. So these knights will get some more raiding done before they're dealt with. A couple of pikemen coming in though, which will give them some pause. And indeed will probably see them into a general retreat. Zach Frennet making sure to help himself to this relic while he's in the south unopposed, and why not? Now there's a couple of longboats here on the southern coast of Groundskeeper Willie's base, and if I were Groundskeeper Willie, I would be gravely aggravated and frustrated by this, particularly when these formerly extremely successful pikemen who have seen off the night raid have fallen to these southern arrows. Groundskeeper Willie will now struggle to have any troops in the southern area of his base, which is now, one would have to imagine, classified as endangered. Meanwhile, Zach Frennet sneaking and snooking 3 more villagers over onto the western side of the map. No doubt seeking to help himself to any resources that might be here. It is actually a little light on resources, but he may well help himself to another relic while he's here. Now, we do see quite a delicious camel archer raid from Groundskeeper Willie, which is going to repay Zach Frennet from some of the pillaging and rapine that he engaged in with those knights from earlier. We can see that Zach Frennet's also built a town centre to the north here, key to exploit this golden stone. However, we do luckily see that Groundskeeper Willie is building a siege workshop here, and this town centre, unsupported as it is, and quite a distance from Zach Frennet's main base, could well be under long-term threat by the existence of this siege workshop. Meanwhile, we do see that Zach Frennet has also built a castle in a prominent hill position here, which is quite a commanding position on that hill. So if I were Groundskeeper Willie, I would want to expunge this castle from existence. Meanwhile, the Camel Archer raid continues, but it has to be said, it is finding little in the way of easy targets. Zach Frennet has now built yet another castle in the middle of his base to protect his previously threatened woodlines, so if these camel archers are to return in this direction, they will not find the pickings as plentiful as they did before. That said, if they were to go further east, they would find some plentiful pickings in terms of these fishing ships. But it looks like they may run into this castle, and yes, so luckily though, it seems Groundskeeper Willie's paying attention and he was quick to turn them around. Now unfortunately he's turned them completely around and is heading back in the other direction. It would have been a little bit lucky on his part if he had instead continued them forward and taken out these fishing ships, but unfortunately it appears he just wasn't lucky in that respect. Once again, the population situation is closer to even now. It's 80 versus 90 overall, and it has to be said that Groundskeeper Willie has a massive military advantage at the moment. He has more than double Zach Frenet's military, primarily in the form of these camel archers. He has taken out now that northern town center that Zach Frennet had built, and he now has some siege, and it would be very nice if we could see these siege engines backing up this raiding force of camel archers. If those rams were to roll into this castle, for instance, they'd be able to absorb its castle fire whilst damaging the castle, whilst freeing up the camel archers to attack these villagers. Now, it does look like they have found the fishing ships, much to my delight. And though the fishing ships, by and large, will escape, the fish traps will not be so lucky. Now, an additional force of camel archers joining the first, making this a more formidable raid. But at this point in the game, when Groundskeeper Willie has such a significant military advantage in terms of military population, I would probably be wanting this force to be doing a little bit more in terms of either successfully raiding or alternatively actually engaging in an attack backed up by siege. We know that Groundskeeper Willie has some siege engines. There are some rams up here in the north. We also know that he has the wood to make more, and he is making another ram, it has to be said. He would have had the gold as well, but he has just clicked up to the Imperial Age, which has cost a fair amount of gold. Zach Frennet is now beginning to produce berserkers. Once again, it is a little bit depressing to see these camel archers riding around without any obvious targets. Zach Frennet is doing a good job of keeping his villagers safe from the raiders, whilst keeping his other economies running and keeping the lights burning. It helps that his economy is very decentralized, A, by the nature of the Budapest map, B, by the fact that he has a lot of water-based economy, which the camel archers are not as best placed to deal with, and of course C, by the fact that he actually has some dispersed economic centers in the corners of the map that Groundskeeper Willie is as of yet not aware of. He took out the one in the north, of course, but Zach Frennet still has decentralized economic units in the west and in the south as well. So both players now in the Imperial Age. We can see some trebuchet are now on the boil by Zach Frennet. And they're not just on the boil, but they've already begun shelling Groundskeeper Willie's northern castle, much to his certain chagrin. Now, Groundskeeper Willie is building some archers to the north. Not entirely sure why he is building those. He'll also have to pay for the tech upgrades to those before they'll be useful in the Imperial Age. So I'm not sure why he needs archers when he already has these camel archers. But we'll see what use he puts them to. He might have just wanted a quick response unit against the berserkers that he was seeing in the north there. It's possible. So now Groundskeeper Willie has these two rams in the north. Now if I were him, I'd send these rams straight against this castle. And I might build a couple of trebuchet in the south as well to back that up and take this castle out once and for all. Because that is in a very threatening position. And I wouldn't want it there as the game devolves into an Imperial Age slugfest. We can see now that Groundskeeper Willie's trebuchet are already coming further south. So Zakfrenet has perhaps sent these trebuchets south a little prematurely and without any military support. Although it looks like Groundskeeper Willie is unwilling to sacrifice too many of his camel archers in aid of taking those trebuchet out. The camel archer is clearly proving something of a gnat in Zakfrenet's side because he is queuing up a lot of skirmishers now. Repeat, a lot of skirmishers. Meanwhile, Groundskeeper Willie has decided to get in on the trebuchet party, and he has queued up a number of trebuchet from his castles, which we can expect, at least we can hope, will be pointed directly at this northern castle, threatening him up here. No major action on the southern border as of yet. Everything is focused in the north here. Aha, so we're going to have a combination ram trebuchet combo, it appears. So this could be successful. Now Groundskeeper Willie appears a little bit hesitant to field these camel archers forward. And he's right considering the number of archers or arbalesters that are now on that hill. So actually I can't disagree with his choice there to hold his archers back. It was the right move. So we're seeing a lot of trebuchet now on this castle, and I think it will go down at this point. Zakfrenet is moving forward to try and stop them, but it has to be said he is not going to be in time. Those skirmishers certainly proving a problem for Groundskeeper Willie. Now, oh dear, Zakfrenet trying to rebuild that castle, but perhaps a little bit too soon before the trebuchet had even unpacked and moved south. So certainly a criminal waste of stone there, although the military situation has certainly turned around. So Zakfrenet can probably afford that stone loss in the long run. The military statistics now tell quite a different story to what we saw in the giddy heights of the Castle Age. 54 military population for Zakfrenet, only 13 for Groundskeeper Willie. It is not looking good for our friend in the orange. We are also seeing a population of 66 versus 130 or thereabouts, so almost double the population. Which will make production to defend a difficult prospect for Groundskeeper Willie, and we can see that he is low on most resources, particularly the resources that he would probably like in order to challenge these elite skirmishers and arbalists. Groundskeeper Willie, sensing a lack of opposition, will move these trebuchet north behind the safety, or the relative safety, of these stone walls. Now those stone walls are, of course, not yet complete, and there are some straggling skirmishers around and about. We can start seeing now some fairly distinctive differences in technological advancement, as well, with Zach Fennett having time and resources to spend in upgrading his capabilities. We can see that his skirmishers have some considerable updates and upgrades to their attack and armor, and they also, of course, have the chemistry upgrade we can see, whilst Groundskeeper Willie does not. Zach Fennett hoping to snag this additional relic here, but it looks like he will be denied that opportunity. Meanwhile, in the south, we are starting to see some aggression based on the fact that Groundskeeper Willie lost control of the southern coastline. So we do see some villagers have been ferried in here and have managed to castle drop Groundskeeper Willie's southern base, forcing an evacuation of his villagers. This is going to severely constrain his economy because he's lost half of his territory, and there's a lot of unexploited resources still in this general vicinity of this southern castle, which will now be lost. In addition, a lot of farms. We can see that Groundskeeper Willie not really relying, or not able to rely, on a fish-based economy as Zach Fennett has, primarily because of Zach Fennett's control now of all 4 lakes. So we are seeing that the southern base has been lost. Zach Fennett now moving north with some trebuchet. Now, he has taken some significant military losses during this affair, including a significant loss of skirmishers up here that we unfortunately appear to have missed, but one can only assume that it was thanks to the plucky work of this northern onager up here. That said, although Groundskeeper Willie will certainly be grateful for the victories he has managed to win, with the loss of this southern base, things are looking fairly irreversible at this point. Now, he has started building Cavalier, which are potentially a decent counter to Berserkers. Unfortunately, these are elite Berserkers, and they are well upgraded with armor and attack, and they are going to out-attack and out-armor those Cavalier. Groundskeeper Willie moving now to try and take out the trebuchet. And he will be successful, but unfortunately he will not be in time to save his castle. Zach Frennet now continuing to queue more berserkers. He has plenty of gold in the bank, although a certain lack of food, and that is because he has lost a lot of his fishing economy, so that's not going to replenish quite as fast. But as I mentioned, he does have a decentralized economy that is bringing him in some food. And of course, he has plenty of wood, which he can sell at the market as well, if needs be. We can see here Groundskeeper Willie is punishing the areas of the map that Zach Frennet does not have a military presence in. It would be nice if we could see these onagers moving into this relatively undefended section of Zach Frennet's main northern base. He might be able to repay the damage that was inflicted to his own southern base, but unfortunately these onagers are relatively unsupported and would not be able to outrange the castle there, of course. Mind you, they would be able to outrange the town centre, so if I were them, I would probably try and take out the town centre, but we can see here why they're not doing so. They are unsupported. If those Cavalier were defending them, then they might be in a position to move south, but of course those Cavalier have bigger problems to deal with, unfortunately. And that is often the story of Age of Empires. There are opportunities which exist, but which you feel as a player you're not in a position to take because of perceived pressure which you might feel you are under. And that's certainly the case for Groundskeeper Willie here, who simply does not have the luxury of ignoring these trebuchets, which are guarded by a significant amount of berserkers. He will try to wheel some cavaliers around along with his camel archers to try and divert the berserkers, holding some additional cavaliers back who may be trying to run in then and take out the trebuchet, except they aren't running in, unfortunately. So we're seeing some archery ranges now coming up for Zach Frennet here, which will start to pump out some more additional elite skirmishers to deal with this relatively effective combination of camel archers and cavalier, which would have done well against solely berserkers, but against berserkers and skirmishers, one has to imagine that these elite berserkers will be sufficiently backed up by the skirmishers once they've hit enough numbers. Now, once again, the trebuchet probably being moved a little too far forward versus where the berserkers were, although the berserkers have responded fairly quickly and it looks like it might be okay. As we can see, those elite berserkers are more than a match for the cavalier, and it looks like this southernmost castle will be in trouble. Zach Frennet will of course lose this western castle, however, despite the villagers attempting to repair it. Probably not worth it, probably a waste of stone. Of course, Groundskeeper Willie may take some solace in the fact that he has made Zach Frennet pay for a castle with a castle, but unfortunately that is a price that Zach Frennet is in a better position to pay at the moment than Groundskeeper Willie. Now, with Berserkers in his primary base and his population falling dramatically, I can only say that it is probably a matter of seconds before we see a good game being called. Berserkers making short work of the home town centre of Groundskeeper Willie as they move forth to take their earthly pleasures against the populace. A small group flees to the north, perhaps intending to make some caliber of last stand, which we would be more than delighted to see, because, as I mentioned at the start of the stream, this is, of course, match point for Zach Frenish. He has certainly, at this point, secured his place in the Baldo Invitational Tournament final. Therefore, I would consider it a matter of dignity and honour for Groundskeeper Willie to wall himself in here, as he is indeed doing, in order to enjoy a last stand worthy of fables. Now, we do see that he has some stone in the bank. He could wall himself in here. Preserve a sense of peace for these stone and wood miners for what little time they have left before the advancing Viking force, the Berserker gang. And here indeed is that Berserker gang, marching north with their skirmisher cohorts. Unfortunately, they've picked the wrong direction and they'll walk right into this wall. Some builders taking some fire for the team. And indeed, the foes choosing to batter on the walls. Such is their lust for carnage that they cannot wait for their siege to arrive. They will tear their way into the enemy base by hand and axe. Now this is promising. Oh! I think we can all agree that if Groundskeeper Willie gets a good onager shot in before the end of the game, the moral victory will probably, ambiguously at least, rest with him. The question is, can he do it? Those skirmishers are presenting a tempting target indeed. Oh! And Zach Frenish is toying with his defeated foe, microing these skirmishers and trying to take out the onager. We'll see how successful they are, as he will have to pay attention on the right hand side once his berserkers break through this stable. And frustrated by his onager's lack of success, but otherwise having completed a very classy last stand, Groundskeeper Willie has declared good game. And indeed it was a good game, closer I think than the first match which we watched earlier today. There was certainly a period of time in the Castle Age where Zach Frenish did not have anything to counter Groundskeeper Willie except for patience and hope. And of course, the Castle Age Groundskeeper Willie had almost double his military. We'll see some of this in the statistics, of course. Obviously, in a 1v1, the statistics always look a little bit unfairly one-sided, I feel, because one player invariably gets steamrolled at the end. Meanwhile, military stats, we can see a fairly healthy kill-death ratio for Zach Frennet there. Always nice to see. Not a terrible one for a losing player there with Groundskeeper Willie. Again, in a 1v1, this is usually a little bit more chilling a figure in terms of having also lost all of their economic population. So that's not too bad. Largest army there certainly tells a tale. We see 41 versus 117. Economy, we can see that Groundskeeper Willie actually managed to collect more gold, which is nice. Technology, as we mentioned during the stream, I think, a very healthy feudal time for Groundskeeper Willie, 11 minutes 46 seconds. They say anything below 12 minutes can be described as a godlike feudal time, so certainly worthy of mention there. Similarly, Zach Bennett has a very healthy castle age time. He certainly deployed a textbook fast castle maneuver there, it has to be said. And again, both players extremely close, getting into the imperial age. In terms of society, my favorite statistic there, the villager high, 84 to 66, certainly tells a tale. For a large portion of the game, from feudal and castle age right to the end, we saw that Zach Frennet had a fairly healthy advantage in terms of number of villagers, and that then allowed him to pump out continuous reinforcements for his imperial age military offensive, which was ultimately successful. The timeline here certainly tells a story. Again, we can see after the castle age was arrived at, even though Groundskeeper Willie was later into the castle age than Zach Frennet, his military capabilities in that period were typically at least double what Zach Frennet was able to muster. Almost the entire period both players were in the castle age. Unfortunately, Zach Frennet did have a lot of stone and built a lot of defensive castles, and scuppered Groundskeeper Willie's repeated raiding attempts with those camel archers, who in many cases were rather unlucky and perhaps the victims of some lackluster initial scouting, often taking the long way around into Zach Frenet's base, and on occasion perhaps wanting some siege rams to take out some of those castles, or some rams, I should say, not siege rams, to back them up in their raiding. Because once they realized the populace had plenty of castles to hide in, that's when I probably would have started trying to produce those rams, particularly when I noticed that the units were riding around for such a prolonged period in Zach Frenet's base without really meeting any kind of counters in terms of military units. If all your opponent is really doing is trying to hide, it's a fairly good sign that you should turn your raid into an all-out attack, in my book. Of course, backseat driving is extremely easy from the streamer's chair, and as you know, yours truly was, of course, knocked out in round 1 of this tournament. Round 1, game 1, in probably, I'd say, about 8 minutes. So you can take my advice with a grain of salt. Next up this evening, we'll be taking a look at the Baldo Invitational Tournament Grand Final between Zach Frennet and Grimm, both players undefeated in their run-up to the final. We will soon see if they can give us a bit of a slugfest, or if we'll be seeing a few back-and-forth rushes. Personally, as you know, I would love to see a few Imperial Age slugouts with some nice gold-intensive armies, but we know that both players are not averse, particularly Grimm, not averse to some coy, dark and feudal age tactics, depending on what civilizations they get. So we have all this and more in about 20 or 30 minutes. So, we will see you then. And as always, may God bless Baldo.